The Dragon Ball manga series by Akira Toriyama first released in Japan on December 3rd, 1984. The Dragon Ball anime series would premiere a year and a half later on February 26th, 1986. It ended on April 12th, 1989. A mere 2 weeks later, the Dragon Ball Z anime premiered, and the rest is history. Around 1 year or so after the original Dragon Ball's premiere, Bandai had acquired all merchandising rights to the series. While it obviously included toys, cards, and collectibles, they also made video games. Several Dragon Ball games were made for the Famicom, the NES in Japan, and while there are numerous Dragon Ball games, we're concentrating on the more iconic series, Dragon Ball Z. Join me today as we look back on the Dragon Ball Z fighting games. The first Dragon Ball Z fighting game is Super Butoden for the Super Famicom, or Super Nintendo. It released in Japan in March 1993, and later in France and Spain that November. It was also the first game on a 16-bit system. It featured 10 playable characters: Goku, Piccolo, Vegeta, Gohan, Trunks, Frieza, Android 20, Android 16, Android 18, and Cell. It also featured a very unique fighting engine, far different from what they've seen in Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter. Along with their life meter, characters slowly gain energy that they can use for throwing special ki attacks. Even more unique is that both characters were not confined to the same screen. You could freely move apart, causing a split screen effect to gain more distance, or with the press of a button, leap into the air or descend back down. A radar located near the top of the screen helps track where everybody is, and as a nice little nod to the series, the androids cannot be tracked. Of course, Dragon Ball Z has a long list of iconic attacks and energy blasts, most of which are recreated in Super Butoden. Getting enough distance and causing the screen to split allowed anyone with enough energy to throw a special energy wave, complete with the voice actor soundbites calling out the name. The target then has an opportunity to defend against the blast with several maneuvers. They could block for half the damage, dodge for a fourth of the damage, or attempt to deflect it, oftentimes sending it right back at the attacker. The story mode begins with Goku's fight with Piccolo at the martial arts tournament at the end of Dragon Ball and goes up until the final showdown with Perfect Cell. Before each fight, you're given the option of choosing from your available heroes to fight with, and should they lose, they'll be unselectable for the remainder of the story, or until you use a continue. There's also the standard versus mode and a tournament mode for up to 8 players. For as enjoyable as Super Butoden is, it didn't quite capture the feel of Dragon Ball Z. Everything feels floaty and lacks the ridiculous speed that the series is known for. Thankfully, Bandai recognized this as well. Only 9 months later, Bandai released Dragon Ball Z Super Butoden 2 in Japan in December 1993, and in France and Spain in 1994. This one also features up to 10 playable characters, and a supercharged fighting system. The character sprites became much larger and much more detailed. The overall speed increased dramatically, the size of the arenas were much larger, and it added in a number of features. You could now power up wherever you wish instead of just the sky. The split screen and radar features remained, and the signature attacks were graphically overhauled to look much more devastating and to great effect. They also added in something desperately needed from the series: beam struggles. Quickly inputting your own attack command will launch a beam right back at the enemy, and they collide in midair. Whoever can rapidly mash the A button faster succeeds and blasts their enemy. Another new maneuver that nearly every character has is the Meteor attack. Generally difficult to pull off and to connect with, they are flashy, fast-paced melee attacks like you would see in the show. Meteos do a considerable amount of damage, though a quick-fingered defender can press L or R twice to alleviate some of the damage. These attacks, along with the beam struggle, led to moments very reminiscent of what you would see on TV. The versus and tournament modes remain largely unchanged, but the story mode got something of an overhaul. You pick from one of 4 characters and will play as them the whole time. It begins with the Cell games, and then takes on its own plotline with Bojack, Zangya, and something to do with evil clones. As you play through, you're given a number of choices that can slightly alter how the story plays out, or even get you bonuses such as increased maximum health. It gave slightly more replayability to the story mode. If you play on the harder difficulties and defeat Bojack without continuing, the story mode continues with a final showdown against Broly, and he is accurately portrayed to be as powerful as you think he is. It's also important to note that Super Butoden 2 may be the only Dragon Ball Z game in existence in which Goku is not a readily playable character. He is shown during his one-on-one fight with Cell in the story mode, but that's all computer controlled. He can only be selected by entering in a secret code, making him available in the Versus mode, along with Brawly. Super Butoden 2 was extremely well received, even with its liberties taken on the story. The anime series had just gotten to the start of the Boo saga, so it would be a little bit before Bandai could get to work on the next sequel. Dragon Ball Z Super Butoden 3 was released in Japan in September 1994, and in the European countries a few months later. It featured 9 playable characters, with newcomers Goten, Kid Trunks, Adult Gohan, Majin Buu, Supreme Kai, and Deborah. The battle system is largely unchanged from Super Butoden 2, with a few minor differences. Powering up gets energy much faster now, the arenas are much smaller in comparison, and you can now jump into the sky while directly next to your opponent. Oddly missing is any sort of story mode. Super Butoden 3 only has a Versus and a Tournament mode. The Meteor attacks were also changed to be a little more personal for each character, but not as over the top as they once were. The beam struggles are a little more subdued looking, but just as effective. A secret code can be entered in to play as a hidden 10th character, Future Trunks, who plays largely as he did in Super Butoden 2. Super Butoden 3 wasn't as well received as the second, mainly due to its lack of features. The game was still a financial success, ensuring Bandai could continue making Dragon Ball Z games in the future. In between the releases of Super Butoden 2 and Super Butoden 3, Bandai released Dragon Ball Z Buyu Retsuden for the Sega Genesis, or the Mega Drive in Europe. It's a sort of cross between Super Butoden 1 and 2. It had most of the gameplay features of Butoden 2, like powering up, the speed, and the sprites are very similar. It lacked the beam struggles, but it did have a new way of defending against an attack, using quick speed to get out of the way completely. Buyu Retsuden is notable for having some playable characters not in the Super Butoden games: Recoome, Captain Ginyu, and Krillin. Along with the standard Versus and Tournament modes, every character has his or own story mode, even if some of them didn't make any sense. While it plays pretty closely to Butoden 2, the lack of buttons on the Genesis controller made it a little more cumbersome to play, but as it's the only Dragon Ball Z game available for Sega at the time, it was great. The final Butoden game was on the Sega Saturn as Dragon Ball Z Shin Butoden, released only in Japan in November 1995. It once again retained a familiar gameplay feel to the Butoden series. The few new features include smashing your opponent into the background and highly detailed sprites resembling the anime art, though these sprites were taken from Ultimate Battle 22. It also introduced a group battle mode, where you can select up to 5 characters and continue fighting until one side falls. It also has the Mr. Satan mode, where you place bets on fights and use items to cheat the odds into your favor. The gameplay once again became a little more floaty, and matches would frequently end in less than 30 seconds, a detriment to the constant loading of the Saturn. Shin Butoden was quickly forgotten, ending the Butoden series. The PlayStation also got its first Dragon Ball Z game called Dragon Ball Z Ultimate Battle 22. It first came out in Japan in July 1995, into Europe 1 year later, and the United States would finally see it March 2003. This is where the highly detailed sprites found in Shin Butoden originated, and it had 22 playable characters, 27 with a secret code. I'm going to be frank on this one. Ultimate Battle 22 is god-awful. Everything about the game is awkward and sluggish. Every energy blast uses the same sprites, making a Kamehameha look like a pathetic energy ball. It's a very unfun experience. It did first introduce the build-up battle mode, where you can level up your character and increase your strength, and this idea would be used in later Dragon Ball Z games. But the balancing and build-up battle mode made little to no sense. The only good thing this game has going for it is the sprites. And maybe the anime intro. Not quite yet done with the Super Nintendo, Bandai released one more fighting game. Dragon Ball Z Hyper Dimension was released in Japan in March 1996, and into Europe the following December. Hyper Dimension has 10 playable characters and a wholly unique fighting engine. Rather than a separate power and life meter, they're one and the same. Life is denoted by numeric value, and using special attacks takes away some of the energy. Powering up slowly fills it back up. It offered a unique system of risk versus reward, as constantly spamming energy attacks will quickly drain you. A background quick dodge was given to each character, and every super blast could be charged to deal more damage. It also had connected stages, and players could smash opponents into new areas with certain attacks. A counter system was also implemented, allowing a quick retort after blocking some attacks. The new engine also allowed more juggling opportunities, leading to some devastating combos. Every character also got a desperation attack, which is only usable when their life is 80 or below. These deal a ridiculous amount of damage, but they are generally difficult to pull off and to connect with. Even though the beam struggles are gone, a new struggle was introduced, the clash. When two physical attacks happen at the same time, the characters go into a flurry of punches and kicks. Whoever button mashes the most and follows up with a ki blast stuns their opponent, opening them up for heavy damage. The story mode follows the major fights from Frieza all the way up to Boo. This story mode does not require you to win every battle, as some are near impossible to do so. Getting to the end without continuing does give 3 extra fights, known as Gohan's Trials, in which he faces off against Goku, Gotenks, and Vegito. Hyperdimension is widely popular for its unique fighting system and for being something completely different from the previous Butoden games. It's also given praise for the detailed sprites on the Super Nintendo, and it was a much better success than Super Butoden 3. Speaking of unique fighting systems, Bandai made one last game for the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn. Simply called Dragon Ball Z: The Legend, it released in 1996. The battles in this game primarily took place in the air, and would follow the story battles up through the Buu saga. What made this one unique is that many fights would frequently have far more than just 2 people fighting, and players could freely change between teammates. Characters could work together and use a flurry of punches and kicks to deal damage, and build the power balance meter at the bottom in their favor. Once it completely filled to their side, a cutscene like Power Attack would play out for heavy damage. Dragon Ball Z: The Legend proved popular enough for a greatest hit re-release, though it was never seen in the States. Many people are familiar with and love Dragon Ball GT Final Bout. It came out on the PlayStation in 1997. But it's technically not a Dragon Ball Z game, so we won't be covering it. A new Dragon Ball Z game won't be made for another 5 years. During this time, Bandai's contract on exclusive merchandise rights had expired. It was also around this time that Dragon Ball Z really hit its newfound mainstream popularity in the United States. During that 5-year lull, Atari, formerly Infogrames, got the rights to Dragon Ball Z. This is also when a new generation of home consoles reached the market. Join us next time as we say goodbye to the 16 and 32-bit fighters, and say hello to Budokai.